Hello everyone, this is Ohio Dan. Reverend20Piece in his latest video asked me if, and I'm not going to edit this video probably, I'm going to post it basically as quickly as I can. He asked me if my thoughts about the 2020 election have changed or kind of evolved in some way since the video that I made about a month ago, where I talked about how I think Trump supporters are basically way too confident that he's going to win this election just because of what happened in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. And I talked about how this election in many ways is different. And, Reverend20Piece mentioned that, he kind of agreed with my points, but he wonders kind of what I think now with some of the other factors that you can observe aside from the polls themselves. The polls themselves still show Biden ahead by 6 to 10 points on a national level. But Reverend20Piece wondered, okay, that's taking place. We still have these polls that are very, very much in Biden's favor. But then we see these rallies where Trump has a lot more people showing up than Biden. We have yard signs that seem to be maybe not overwhelmingly so, but there seems to be a lot more Trump yard signs compared to Biden's. It seems like, Trump still has a lot of support, maybe even more support than he did in 2016 in some ways, or at least as much support. And basically Reverend20Piece was wondering, with all these other factors at play, could it be that these polls are just wrong? And basically, yes, it could be that the polls are that far off and that Trump can still win the election. But I think it's basically going to be a showdown between two possibilities. It's going to be a situation where there are two really distinct possibilities, and one of them is going to be true and one of them is going to be false. And the first possibility is that the polls are reasonably accurate, even if they're off by a little bit compared to the actual result. And that was the case in 2016, where the polls were just over 1% off. They predicted that Hillary Clinton would have 3.2% more of the popular vote, if I remember right, and she ended up with supposedly, 2.1% more of the popular vote. And Trump overcame that by winning in the battleground states. You don't have to have more of the popular vote to win. It's the Electoral College that counts, of course. So it's a state-by-state thing, but still, if you're 6 to 10 points behind, like Trump is in the polls right now, you're not doing well. It's going to be nearly impossible to make that up by winning all the battleground states, because most likely, if you're that far behind, those battleground states are not going to go your way. So my response to what Reverend20Piece was asking is, like I say, first of all, it's going to be a showdown between those two things. Unless the polls change drastically, either the polls are totally wrong and they're garbage, and you just can't pay attention to them anymore because they're so biased and so flawed that Trump wins anyway, despite being that far behind in the polls, or Trump's going to lose. The Trump supporters who think that he's surely going to win, that's not going to work out for them. Trump's going to lose, the polls are going to be reasonably accurate, and it's just not going to work out for him. One of those two things has to be false. Either Trump's not going to be able to win, or the polls are totally wrong. Like, one of those two things is going to be proven valid, and the other idea is not going to be valid. So it's really going to be a showdown between those two outcomes. One thing that I wanted to mention is on, something that Reverend20Piece mentioned about libertarian-minded people. I actually come from a very similar perspective, I think, Rev, compared to your perspective. There are probably some minor differences, but I also voted for the Libertarian ticket in 2016. In 2020, I do plan to vote for Trump as well. My sort of change in thinking is I didn't realize how Trump would be so, besieged by the left. I didn't kind of understand that Trump is the only one in the United States that's really standing up against what the left is trying to do. And at this point, the left has pretty much openly embraced, in my view at least, Marxist ideas. It's all about whether you're racist, sexist, and so on. It's not about, actually the policies. It's just about whether you fit into the oppressor or the victim category. And so if I had realized that there was going to be this very distinct separation into the left and the right, and that Trump was going to be the only one standing up against really a radicalized ideology on the left, I would have voted for Trump in 2016 as well. And people may disagree with that if they're listening to this video, but I think Trump is really the only one standing against the radical left these days. And if I realized in 2016 that that's what it was going to be like, I probably would have voted for Trump as well. I realized, and maybe there are some other libertarian-minded people who are going through this change of heart, or not really a change of heart. My positions haven't changed that much, but a change in mindset in terms of what the overall situation is. But the thing is, there really aren't that many people that are libertarian-minded anymore. A lot of it is just, who are you going to vote for, Trump or Biden? Even in 2016, Gary Johnson really didn't get that many votes, depending on what you're looking at, except for in New Mexico, because that's his home state. But to a large extent, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference unless the election in a particular state, unless the vote count is really close, and maybe a few of those libertarians gravitate toward Trump. That's possible, but I don't think that's going to happen in large enough numbers to make a difference, most likely. It might in one or two states, but I think that there aren't that many people that are libertarian-leaning to begin with, unfortunately. At this point, I consider myself basically kind of a center-right libertarian, but a lot of people are just on the right or on the left, and they're not really seeing any middle ground at all. So I just don't know that there are enough libertarian-minded people to affect the results of the election. Maybe, like I say, in a really tight vote count in a particular state, that could happen. But I don't think that'll basically lend Trump a whole lot more in the way of support. The other point that I want to make, and this is really the main point that I want to put out there as a response, is that a lot of Biden supporters simply, and to even call them supporters is not really accurate, a lot of people that will vote for Biden are simply not really that enthusiastic about Biden. They really are voting for Biden because they have been basically groomed or indoctrinated by the media to vote against Trump. Most Biden supporters couldn't care less about Biden himself. And this is a reason why you see people that are confronted with the whole Hunter Biden issue and the political graft and how he was, on like a board of directors for a Ukrainian corporation. It was clearly a political deal. And you could argue about that. And I haven't researched, what was found on his laptop and stuff like that more recently. But the reason why many of these Biden voters don't care about that is because to them, they're just voting against Trump anyway. They don't really even pay attention to what Biden represents. And the reason why they're voting for Trump, voting against Trump and voting for Biden, the number one reason for it is that's what the media has told them to do. They've watched CNN and MSNBC and all the mainstream media networks that want Trump to lose, and all they do is say bad things about Trump, and they've done this for 4 years. Now, some people can see through that. Most people can't, especially people that aren't very politically aware to begin with. So I think the reason why you see more people at these Biden rallies, at the Trump rallies compared to the Biden rallies, is that a lot of the people that want to vote for Biden, they don't really care about Biden himself. They just don't want Trump in office. And so if enough of these people vote, Biden is going to win. And, I don't want to get into the coronavirus topic very much here, but that could be one of the reasons why the coronavirus panic has been allowed to sort of continue. And I know there are various kind of theories about this that may or may not be valid, but if you encourage people to vote by mail, that's probably going to lead to more of these Biden voters actually casting their ballot for Biden. Because if you actually have to go out to the facility, to where, the polling location for your area is, and you have to go out and maybe wait in line and all that, and be around a bunch of people, and you don't necessarily want to do that, you're probably not going to go vote unless you're somewhat enthusiastic about who you're voting for. But if you can just sit on your butt and watch CNN, which is what a lot of these people are doing to begin with, or just, not really do much of anything and just fill out your ballot for Biden and then mail it at your convenience, you're probably going to be more likely to do that, even if you're not very enthusiastic about who you're voting for. And so that might be one of the reasons that this whole mail-in thing, supposedly as a result of the coronavirus, which, technically it is, that might be one of the reasons why the media is encouraging this, is because, hey, you're more likely, if you're a Biden supporter, which you're not really a supporter, you're just voting against Trump, you're more likely to cast your ballot if you can do it from the convenience of your own home, if you don't have to go out to the polls. So that's really a key factor, I think, is there are a lot of people in my family, or not a lot, but some people who fit into this category where they're not really political. They have no idea what's going on aside from what CNN tells them. And they're told that Trump is bad and you should vote against Trump. And so they're going to fill out their ballots and vote against Trump, even if they go and actually, most of them probably will vote from home. I don't really know, but it doesn't matter how they cast their ballot. They'll vote against Trump. So I think a lot of the question of which possibility, which outcome is more likely, is it that the polls are so wrong that they're totally unreliable, or that Trump is going to lose this election? A lot of it's going to come down to these unenthusiastic Biden voters, the people that basically are drones. And I hate to say that. I mean, it's kind of mean to put it that way, but they've basically been indoctrinated to hate Trump. They have no clue what's going on overall in terms of the political environment. They know Trump's bad because that's what they've been taught to believe. And then Trump does, make an ass out of himself a lot of the time. He makes himself look bad by thinking that he knows everything. So I'm not trying to deny that Trump adds to that. He makes it easier for these media outlets to do this in a lot of cases, but they'd be doing it anyway, just because they want Biden to win in many cases. That's just where it stands. And so it becomes a question of, will enough of these unenthusiastic Biden supporters come out and vote? And again, supporters is really just kind of a relative term. They don't really even care. That also answers, by the way, I don't know how many people that watch my videos watch Red Pill Germany's videos. I like to see what his perspective is. I enjoy a lot of his content, and because he's in a different country, obviously, it's a different take than what you get in the United States a lot of the time. But he was saying, he talked to his more lefty friends and people that lean to the left in the United States, and he couldn't figure out why they weren't taking the Hunter Biden controversy and corruption seriously. Well, the reason is they don't care about Biden. They don't care about Joe Biden. They don't care about anything that's going on in terms of corruption. They just don't like Trump. They will vote for almost anybody against Trump, and they're not going to take a scandal seriously because they're not really voting for Biden to begin with. They're just voting for Trump because they have been trained basically to think that Trump is bad, that he's the devil, and they're going to vote against him by voting for Biden. That's what a lot of it is. So it boils down to how many of these unenthusiastic Biden supporters will actually vote. Will enough of them vote to the point where Trump loses the election? And I think the answer to that is probably yes. I think enough of them will vote, especially with the mail-in stuff. It's going to be a mess, man. I don't think that Trump will win, but I could be wrong. If the polls end up being totally wrong, then that's the way, we'll see. It'll be self-evident. And then we know that the polls are garbage from that point on. Or it could be that the race tightens up between now and Election Day, but I don't see that happening yet either. But unless the polls do tighten up, unless, it becomes a closer race, even according to the polls, it's going to be a showdown, which is true. Are the polls historically wrong? Beyond anything in past presidential elections. And like I said, in 2016, they were only wrong by just a little over 1%. They're going to have to be wrong by like 5% or close to that in order for Trump to have a chance. Are they going to be off by that much? I don't think so. There's really nothing in history, in at least modern presidential elections, that has shown that. Maybe if you go all the way back to like 1948, when it was Truman and Dewey, and all the newspapers said, Dewey defeats Truman, and they were wrong. Truman won the election, and it made the media look stupid. Maybe back if you go that far, if you go that far back in history, possibly that could be an example. But I don't even know if they did polls then, honestly, or it definitely wouldn't be the same as it is now in terms of how data is collected and stuff. So there's really no precedent for the polls being that far off on a national level. And so I think that it's more likely that Trump will lose. And like I say, why are these rallies for Trump so much larger than the rallies for Biden in terms of the number of people that show up? Because nobody's really enthusiastic about Biden. But that doesn't mean they won't vote for him. That doesn't mean that they won't sit there in the comfort of their own home and fill out a ballot and send it in the mail. I still don't think it looks good for Trump's re-election chances. The final point that I want to make, I guess, is basically what will happen with this election on the day of the election and shortly thereafter. Is there a chance for some sort of unfortunate event to take place in terms of, an insurrection or whatnot? And I don't want to get into the whole violent aspect of it because this video could be taken down and all that. And I'm not suggesting that violence is good or that, we should look forward to that or anything. So, don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But I've made videos in the past about whether there would be a civil war. People say, well, we're on the brink of civil war in the United States. And, I said basically, I don't think so. Because the people that would have to start the rebellion would be conservatives. Because the leftists are winning in the current system. They are. They're gaining more and more ground. They're indoctrinating more and more people. If they continue to push and conservatives just sort of sit there and say, well, we still have the right to free speech technically, and, we still have the right to bear arms technically, and so we're not going to revolt or anything, eventually it's going to get to a point where the leftists just take over and nobody will have any rights. That's what I see happening. I know that's a little bit of a different topic, but my mindset is conservatives would have to be the ones that actually wanted to fight against the current system in some form. That's not what conservatives want. Conservatives want the Constitution. They want to, continue the system that we have, even though the system that we have, ironically, is being used by the left to get what they want. But if Trump would win this election, I question what would happen after that. And I'm not saying, again, I encourage people to vote for Trump over Biden, but if Trump would somehow win the election, how would the media react? What excuses would be given after Biden was so far ahead in the polls? And like I say, it's just, we don't know what's going to happen. I don't know who's going to win this election. I'm not pretending that I do. I feel like Biden is most likely going to win. But what is our future going to hold? What will leftists do? Because if we leave it up to them, some of these crazy leftists will try to revolt. There could be, a lot of violence. And they don't care about the rule of law. They don't care about doing things the proper way. You saw after the 2016 election that they really, really protested a lot against Trump. And that's not the same as violence, of course, but they were literally protesting the results of the election. They are not content to accept defeat the way that conservatives are. So, if Biden wins, there's going to be a lot of shocked Trump supporters, and I don't know how they'll react either. But if Trump wins, I think a lot of leftists may get pretty crazy. And again, I'm not saying that means, you shouldn't vote for Trump. I encourage people to vote for Trump. But we'll see. It may not be a very nice, amicable, friendly outcome either way. And like I say, on the Trump side, people might just be very much in shock. And a lot of these Trump supporters think that he's just going to win no matter what. If it doesn't work out that way, I think that that's what my original video on this topic was meant to address. It's like, I think you need to look at the polls and maybe consider that Trump's not going to win. But I got some backlash for that, of course, and they still think that Trump is somehow going to win because he did it in 2016. And it's like, okay, we'll find out. But I think the polls have to be totally wrong in order for that to be the case. And I don't think that's the case. We'll see. We'll see one way or the other. And if I'm wrong, I'll own it. That's fine. I've been wrong about things before. But I think it's still more likely that Trump was going to lose this election. And I still don't think we're on the brink of a civil war. I don't think it's going to work out that way because, again, the left is still pretty much in control of what we would call the deep state or the system in itself. And the conservatives are generally, they respect law and order. So who's going to start the civil war? I don't think that's going to happen. But things could get a little bit nasty after this election one way or the other. We'll see. But like I say, I hope people are prepared for either outcome. And as I said, Rev, I think the difference is the level of enthusiasm. You have a lot more enthusiastic people for Trump, but you have people voting for Biden just because they hate Trump. And as you mentioned, there aren't that many people, especially if you look at normies, who really hate Biden, who know that Biden is corrupt and all that. And they're not shown that in the media or anything. They will vote for Biden just as the anti-Trump candidate. And if enough of them cast their ballots, even if the polls end up being off by a couple of points, I don't think it's going to be enough to make up the difference. If enough of those kinds of people who have basically, like I said, been groomed to vote for Biden have been, indoctrinated and just kind of pushed into that. If enough of them cast their votes for Biden, I don't think Trump will win. So my overall sort of prediction hasn't changed. It's possible, of course, like I said, that I could be wrong. But that's my account of things. That's the way that I see things going on. We'll have to see what happens. It's a very interesting election, not just because each side is so polarized, and it's this one side or the other type of thinking, more so than in a normal presidential election or average presidential election. But it's also one of two things has to be true, and one the other one's going to be false. Either the polls are complete garbage, or Trump will lose. One of those two things is true, not both. And so we'll just have to see how it plays out. But, what are these unenthusiastic voters on Biden's side going to do? I don't know. But that might be the difference maker. That might be what this comes down to. And as you've said, Rev, there's not the same level of hate for Biden. There's a lot of hate for Trump that the media has engineered. Like I say, people have been engineered to vote for Biden for that reason. And so it's not going to lead to them going to some sort of Biden rally, but that doesn't mean they won't vote for Biden. And I think that's the key to how this will turn out. And we'll just have to wait and see which event occurs. But I still think that Trump supporters and everybody in general really need to be prepared either way, but Trump supporters in particular need to be prepared for him to lose. I really think people need to at least pay attention to that possibility, because I still think that's the more likely outcome. I hope that Trump wins, and I encourage people to vote for Trump in this election. If you see things even close to the way that I see things politically going on, I think, voting for Trump is the correct move. But at the same time, do I think that he'll win? I'm not very confident that that's how it'll turn out. And I just don't think the polls are going to be that far off, to be honest.